I enjoy being outside. I enjoy the connection that I get with nature, being out there, picking the fruit and getting to kind of experience the wildlife and the things that you pick up that you can't learn anywhere else, that you wouldn't learn in a book or on the internet, that you just have to be out there to learn, are pretty awesome.
Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hello, this is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks for listening. And we're back. I've had to take a break for a few weeks so that I could focus on the Centralas harvest, but our fruit is in, our ferments are dry, and our wine is in barrel now. And I say our fruit rather than our grapes because this year I picked and fermented prickly pears in addition to grapes to become our wine. As we continually strive to move Centralas in the direction of becoming a more ecologically thoughtful and environmentally beneficial winery, I became convinced that prickly pears need to be an important part of what we do and what we promote as a Los Angeles-based winery. Prickly pears are native to Los Angeles and other parts of the Southwest and have been tended and used here for thousands of years. The entire cactus is useful and edible, and I foraged and picked them this year from natural areas all around Los Angeles, including some within walking distance of my home in South LA. Prickly pears thrive in marginal land without irrigation or chemical inputs of any kind. These are the kinds of fruits that we can build an environmentally positive and ecologically integrated local beverage culture on, a culture that isn't imported, but that represents the unique local flavor of this land. As you can tell, I couldn't be more excited about the potential of incorporating prickly pears into the LA wine renaissance. If you've seen the movie The Graduate, I'm like that guy at Ben's graduation party who takes him aside and says, "I've got one word for you. Are you listening? Just one word. Prickly pears." Okay, that's 2 words. But my guest for this episode, Austin Glasscock, shares my enthusiasm. He's making wine from prickly pears and other wild fruit in Sonora, Texas, with his brand new winery called Wild Texas Wines. Austin is a Marine who got into winemaking as a hobby after his military service and found not only a love of fermentation, but a great excuse to get out into the natural world. I was delighted to hear Austin talk about how he gathers fruit by hand, without equipment, and with some serious risk, so as to move through the landscape as an animal would and leave the lightest footprint. I was inspired also by his vision of staying small, wanting only to make a living and maintain a lifestyle that allows him to interact with nature daily. And the most amazing part is how much the wines Austin makes embodies his love of nature in every aspect of his process. The contrast, frankly, to how we tend to make wines here in California is stark. And it makes me thrilled to be able to share this unassuming and understated winemaker's perspective. We get into some pretty detailed technical specifics about making wine from prickly pears, as well as some practical considerations as well. It's a unique fruit with unique chemistry and some real specialized considerations in the picking and making of the wine. I hope this will be part of a growing body of shared knowledge that others can learn from and add to. I hope that Austin and I and a few others are just the early adopters of what will become a much more popular kind of thinking about making wine ecologically from locally available wild fruit here in the Southwest, where the summers are long, the sun is hot, and the water is more precious than gold. In truth, we aren't early adopters at all. We're just the rediscoverers and revivers of a very old tradition. A special note, one important aspect of prickly pear wine that we didn't really go into at all in this interview was how does it taste? Well, in a way, I don't think we yet know how it tastes. Austin is making prickly pear wine in a very different way than we are with Centralas. And in addition to those stylistic differences, these wines are unique in the world. So I don't want to ruin the surprise for you by describing it. You'll just have to taste it for yourself. Enjoy.
Yes, sir.
Austin, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you and appreciate you doing this. I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Now, you are originally from Southern California. Did I remember that correctly?
I'm actually from Central Ohio originally.
Central Ohio originally. Okay. Got
Yes,
it.
I grew up there, and then I spent most of my time in the service in Southern California.
Gotcha. So can you talk a little bit about what you did in the service? What was your
Yeah,
service?
yeah. I graduated high school. Worked for a year in Virginia, and then I joined the Marine Corps for 5 years. And then in my time there, I served as a recon Marine as my primary MOS, and then a scout sniper as my secondary MOS. And then did that for 5 years, and not too long later, here we are.
So you're still a young guy.
Whew, for now.
But you've had some life experience. Were you stationed overseas?
I did a deployment. It was about I did one full length deployment and then a shorter stint, kind of later on that was separate. But so probably a total of 7, 8 months overseas.
Gotcha. Can you talk about where you were?
Uh, the we kind of went a lot of places, all over the
Got
place,
it. Yeah.
from PACOM to CENTCOM, which is just the South Pacific, and then the Middle East, were the main areas.
Got it. Wow. So you were part of like a special force, special forces. Is that fair to say? I'm clearly ignorant about the military, but
No, no,
yeah, feel free to treat me like an idiot.
no, just kind of depends on who you talk to. As far as the Marine Corps is concerned, we're more specialized overall than any of the other standard units in the Marine Corps, but we don't work specifically for SOCOM, which
Got
stands
it.
for Special Operations Command.
Got it. Well, I mean, I hope somebody thinks you're special. I do.
Hopefully.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, and thanks for doing that too. For being part of that service. I wonder what then steered you. Can you talk a little bit about when you came back? How this process. You're now in Texas, so let's just establish that you're in Sonora, Texas. I just looked at a map, and if I got on the 10 freeway, which is about 2 minutes from my house, and I drove for 18 hours, I'd probably be at your front door. It's a straight
Just
shot
about.
on the 10.
Yeah, only about 2 turns and you're there.
Nice. Well, so what's that story? How did you go from where you were to where you are
Uh,
now?
yeah, I got out of the Marine Corps. I applied some colleges. My plan was originally to stay in Southern California, um, and then I got accepted to San Diego State and studied aerospace engineering there for a year and a half. And then that was kind of when the pandemic was kicking off. Everything got locked down, so I needed another hobby in my off time. So I looked into the home winemaking, and that's kind of how I got my kick into the winemaking um, field. But
Uh-huh.
it drew me because I like to do stuff with my hands, but I also like the scientific uh, process that goes into making wine. So it's kind of
Nope.
the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy that too. There's a thinking element to it, and there's a physical labor element to it, and I definitely need both in my life. I totally resonate with that. And what's weird about you, special I should say, or interesting, unique, is you weren't a huge like it. You didn't come at this the way a lot of people do, which is like they love wine, they fall in love with wine, and then that leads them into this like, how's it made, and I want to make it myself, I want to try my hand at this. You weren't a huge wine fan, right?
No, no, that's correct. I am not a huge traditional wine drinker. I had my grandpa here in Texas used to own a winery, so it's always been intriguing. But I definitely wasn't drawn to the process from the product.
Oh, so it is in your blood though. Well, there you go. You're kind of fated, or
Yeah.
cursed, depending on how you look at it. uh, so is that, and then your grandfather's kind of how you ended up where you are now, right? Like that's the ranch that you are now operating on, is that correct?
The one that owned the winery is a different grandpa, but
Different
yeah,
grandpa. Okay, so
the ranch we're on now came from my other grandpa, my dad's side, and when he passed away, he inherited it, and now we're out here trying to
wait,
make a dream come to life.
both grandpas were from Texas. Did I get that right? Or is the
Yes,
winery okay? So you had some interesting
yeah,
grandparents. One that was
oh
a
yeah.
winery owner in Texas, and another a rancher in Texas. So, or maybe they were both ranchers, and one just happened to make wine on the side.
No, the one was primary. He's actually a veterinary doctor. He owns a veterinary
Mm,
clinic. in the town
Okay.
over. And the winery was kind of a dream of his that he, sought out to do when he was a little bit older.
Oh, that's nice. That's really nice. What, do you know what he was growing?
Oh, I don't actually. And
And
I know that he stopped doing the winery because he was having a lot of trouble getting grapes from Texas. Because he was a small
yeah.
scale guy and they were selling out his reservation of grapes before
Uh,
they to bigger sellers.
oh boy. Yeah. I just had a little. You just re-traumatized me. Don't even bring that up. That's I know that very well. That I think that's true for all us small producers trying to get grapes.
Yeah.
Often fighting above your weight class, punching up if you get to try to get grapes. But well, so wine in terms of grapes was not your thing and is not your thing, but I love that you just started tinkering as a hobby with winemaking, and I'm sure you were in Southern California at the time, so you probably were getting grapes at the time. Is that right? Or
No,
were you
no
doing
grapes.
fruit?
I was
Oh,
exclusively fruit wine experiments.
fruit wine. Wow. So what was your first wine?
I did a few batches: strawberry, blackberry, and one that was like a kiwi type, um, and they were real, all like basically no added, just like raisins, bread yeast. I mean, it was just straight out of the like redneck playbook.
Whatever you had in the pantry kind of thing.
Yeah.
I love that. So how'd this turn out?
The strawberry turned out really good. The other ones, not so much.
So the raisins were for sugar, I'm guessing. Is that right?
They
Or
were
no?
for yeast nutrient. That's what I read. What they
Oh,
were a good yeast nutrient.
interesting. They're probably also a good source of sulfites.
Yeah,
If I don't
yeah.
know if maybe that helped with the preservation of the wine. Who knows? That's awesome. Um, and I mean, did you get hooked after doing that, or like was it an ongoing process that drew you
I
in?
did.
Oh
I
wow!
did
All
it,
right,
and I was like, "This is a good time." It wasn't,
nice.
it's just fun to experiment with, and then eventually enough mindless thinking, and it rolled into where we're trying to go now.
Right. So, well, and we're about to get there. I'm just curious. So, you had a success with strawberry, and I'm guessing a few other failures, like most first time people who don't have a mentor and aren't, doing it with like, whatever kind of supervision you could get if you were in a different situation. Was it the failures that inspired you more, or the successes? Like, did you fail and be like, you know what, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to get it right. Or was it like, oh, the potential is here? Like on the good batches, like, oh, when you hit it right, it's yummy and fun. Or
Yeah,
was it was the good
it
batches
was
that
it was the good batches for sure.
okay.
The bad ones, I was like, "Oh man, this is gonna be a tough sell just to not pour down the drain."
Yep. Yep. All right. So okay, you had reason to leave because your service was done, so you didn't need to be stationed in Southern California anymore. You're Camp Pendleton, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
Was your
yep.
main okay. So heading out to Texas, you're on the 10. Did you go for the wine or did you go because you wanted to go to Texas?
A combination of both.
You, so you'd
I
visited,
went.
you knew that there was something there with the prickly pears and
I had been here
and
so many times as a kid that
okay,
I
got it.
I always knew there was a lot, and I was like,
So
man,
when
if
did
there
that
was something.
when did that idea germinate? That went like what at what moment were you like, oh, I'm making fruit wine and I remember there are all these prickly pears on the ranch.
Oh, I don't know. It was probably sometime between calculus 2 homework where I was like, wow, man, I really don't want to be doing this for a living.
Got it. I gotcha. It was like what am I going to do with my life answer
Yeah.
to that question. That's great. I love that. So, all right. So now let's introduce you our wild Texas wines now. Like you've set this up. You're about to do your grand opening this winter, if I'm correct. Is that right? Looking at your
Yeah, if things go as planned, licensing wise, we should be looking to get our first batch started this winter.
That's awesome. And this is a winery at the on the ranch. So you have a space on the ranch. You're setting up like a tasting room sort of area for on the ranch as well.
No, we're starting off small, so it'll be production only, no tasting room yet. Um,
Okay,
and I'm just going to kind of put out some feelers and see if I can move the product like I'm hoping. And
got it.
if it's successful, then I would like to put up a tasting room.
Nice. And uh, you mentioned licensing. You know, how bad is Texas with licensing? I mean, Texas seems like it's good at all kinds of permits and things. Like,
Yeah, yeah, it's not bad. I know the state filing fee just went up quite a bit, but aside from that, there's not near as many loopholes to jump through as there are in California.
do you know what that fee is
It
now?
is
Did it went up?
3,000.
Oh, whoa, that's significantly higher than California.
Yeah,
Wow,
it
I
was.
would
I
have thought.
believe it was in the hundreds before, and it just went up this year.
Wow, man, I hope no California ABC people listen to this and get any ideas. That's I, this is the one area where we're actually lower cost than Texas. I think we should be proud of that out here. I think it's like under 1,000 now for to get your license. You know, if I mean just the fee. I think
Yeah,
so. So, ah, fascinating. Okay, so let's get into the meat of this. You are. Can you talk about the location where you are? Sonora, Texas.
yeah, yeah. It's the ranch isn't far. It's probably 5 minutes off the 10, but um, we're right on the western edge of the Texas Hill Country. Probably the next town over west, it turns into just plain old desert, and then if you go east, it starts to get humid and a lot more green. So we're kind of right in the sweet spot of a good bit of cedar trees and mesquite trees and cactus and rocks.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like your. When does your rainfall come? Does it come
Oh, I
throughout
mean,
the year? Or?
if you ask somebody who's lived here the last 20 years, they'll say basically never. But this year's been a fluke. It's been raining here almost every 10 days or so.
Through the summer?
Yeah, yeah, through the summer, and then it should be kind of the same throughout the winter into the spring, and then normally the summer is the dry time where people go months without any rain. But it's been a weird year for weather out here.
Yeah, I mean, the weirding is definitely seems to be getting. I mean, we had an unusually beautiful and mild summer with actually a little rain in July and August here in LA, which is basically unheard of for the last I don't know how many years. So it's like the way maybe it used to be normal way back when, and it's now you know just such a strange thing to have a mild summer. It's been crazy. And yeah, anyway, the weirding of weather is definitely happening. Let's talk, but it sounds like you're right at that edge where it's probably perfect for prickly pears because they're getting enough rainfall to be plump and juicy and be vibrant, but it's dry enough that it's still a good cactus climate.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's definitely a prime spot for prickly pear, and there's a several other fruit that I'm looking to expand the winery to that grow native out here.
Oh,
Hence the name. Um,
yeah. So yeah,
there,
what are they? If you can
there's
talk,
a
you want to talk
bush.
to them? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. There's a bush called an agarita berry bush, and they grow small blueberry sized fruit that are red and very unique flavored and sweet. So I'm hoping to, and there's a ton of them out here, as many
Oh
as
wow.
there are prickly pear at least. And then
What's
there
the
are
flavor?
a,
Oh,
uh,
sorry. I
no,
know.
you're good.
You mentioned you're not like a classically trained wine taster, whatever that means. I'm not either. But what is how would you describe those berries?
I don't know that there's a good comparison other than
Okay.
sweet and very unique. Um,
Okay.
I know I'm terrible at this.
Hey, if there's sugar, there's potential alcohol.
Exactly. Um,
All right. So the Agarita berries. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Agarita bush.
aggravated berries. And
Okay.
then there's a tree out here called the Mexican or Texas persimmon that grows,
Uh-huh.
and they grow not the traditional persimmon you see in a grocery store, which
Uh-huh.
is kind of bit fist sized. These ones are marble sized, maybe a little bit bigger. They're real dark and they're real tart, um, much more grape like in flavor than
Oh,
the prickly pear agavita.
yeah. I was gonna say, I hadn't thought about it, but the tannins and things in that are sort of natural and others, if they're in those, would be really good.
Yeah,
Persimmons. It seems like they'd help the wine in the same way that you get sort of wild apples with those tannins and acids that are really high, but they make fantastic cider. That's cool. So it's like is it a wild? I guess it is if you're doing it. It's a wild persimmon.
it is. It is. They grow wild out here.
Do they are? Is it pretty prolific? Is it? I mean, are there a lot of them enough to?
There's a lot. Not enough to do as many as I have done with the prickly pear, but
Yeah.
enough to do some smaller batches with. The female trees are the only ones that fruit, so it's kind of a toss
Oh,
up.
gotcha. Gotcha. So you'd have to almost make them non-wild and sort of
Well,
graft female
y-
trees onto rootstock or something to ensure that you've got a whole orchard of them.
yeah, if I wanted to make an orchard, I think what I'll probably do is this time next year I'll go around and I'll mark all the trees with a tag them with a little piece of string, all the females. That way, and then mark them on a map so I know where to go to pick them.
Got it. Okay, nice. Yeah, that's and let's talk about the ranch. What's the terrain like there? Is it flat, hilly? You're
Mild hills, kind of
okay.
rolling hills, but very rocky. A lot of limestone, tons of cactus, not just prickly pear, but we've got, I mean, so many cactus I couldn't even name them all. Um, everything out here for the most part has some kind of spiky thorn on it.
Right. Yeah, even mesquite, right, is sort of prickly a
hmm
little bit. Um,
Yeah, they've got some big, like 2 inch long thorns on them as well.
nice. Rattlesnakes.
Yo, lots of rattlesnakes, western diamondbacks, and rock rattlers are what they call them out here. They're a little bit smaller, gray colored rattlesnake.
And it's
Um,
like, okay, nice,
yeah, yeah.
fun.
Some
Always
some
make
scorpions. Yeah,
foraging for your prickly pears all the more exciting.
yeah.
Keeps you on your toes.
It does.
um, you've got good boots, right?
I do. I have a pair of 18-inch snake boots that are lined with Kevlar. So
Oh,
as long as
sweet.
they
Okay.
bite me below the knee, I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Do you wear chaps or anything to avoid thorns when you're,
N-
sashaying through the brush?
No, no. I'm pretty good about walking around any of the other brush without. I try
Okay.
not to. I try not to. I try to leave as small of a footprint as I can, so I don't use any equipment or anything while I'm out there, and I don't like crush any of the other stuff that's out there. I just walk around everything kind of like an animal would.
Oh, and why do you do that?
Uh, I mean, just trying to practice good stewardship for the property, for the land in general. I think it's a good habit people should be in, especially when they're out here managing hundreds of acres, where people don't really have that opportunity anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a responsibility of landowners, or it should be a responsibility of landowners to be good stewards of the land.
Yeah. Have you looked into? I mean, I don't know how much rainfall you have, but the more I've studied, the more I realize that my sense of being a good steward of the land a while ago was sort of like leaving it completely untouched, and now I'm sort of like, oh, like human intervention can actually really benefit everything, like make it more, you know, ma- you know. I mean, I guess the benefit is for humans as well, but not to the detriment of biodiversity or just the health of the soil and the landscape that everything is growing in. Is there a balance there that for that landscape where some intervention is good, and what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah. There is, especially when you're running livestock on property like this. A long time ago, when ranchers first took the land out here, they basically overgrazed most of the landscape and then kind of changed the whole ecosystem out here. So
Hmm.
now there's a lot more stress on like not overgrazing your property, making sure that, you know, all the wildlife's, got a equal chance, you could say. And it's just
Yeah.
better overall for everything. It keeps the grass grows when there's not too much livestock. The grass keeps the dirt from blowing away. The dirt holds water, and then that benefits everyone.
Yeah. And carbon and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did that inform your decision to want to use prickly pears, like, or I mean, or wild fruit in general, or just like, was it this sense of, I mean, why not plant vines where you are? It seems like they do great there.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people do plant. A lot of vineyards out here grow grapes. They do grow well out here. But yeah, I enjoy being outside. I enjoy the connection that I get with nature, being out there, picking the fruit and getting to kind of experience the wildlife and the things that you pick up that you can't learn anywhere else, that you wouldn't learn in a book or on the internet, that you just have to be out there to learn, are pretty awesome.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Uh,
I
like
mean,
you can,
I love that. I
yeah,
mean, I think I share that same sentiment. I just wanted to hear more of your thoughts on that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, as far you can, when you're out there, you pick up on, how the wildlife moves. You pick up on where the plants grow best, where they don't. You pick up on what's feeding on what, and it kind of makes you feel like you're more a part of the whole system out there, um, as opposed to just planting a vineyard out there, or
Mm.
planting prickly pear. I could plant prickly pear out here and they would grow and I could row them off so it was easier to pick, but that's not really what I'm trying to do out here.
Yeah. So it sounds like the process is as important to you as the finished thing. It's the participating in the natural landscape is part of what you is part of the culture that you want to embody with your wine.
Yes, absolutely.
Where did that come from? That sort of appreciation or love of the landscape.
I think I grew up in kind of a really small farm town in Ohio.
Mhm.
And I kind of grew up outside a lot in the woods, running around, and then going from there to Southern California kind of
Gave you a
helps you
good
appreciate.
contrast.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Did you appreciate Southern California, or did you always kind of want to get the heck out?
I was never a huge fan. I love the landscape. I love the wild part of Southern
Yeah,
California. I'm just, as far as everything related to people, I'm not a huge fan of.
not not a
Just a
big
little
urban center kind
no.
of person. Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting. There's a push and pull, right? Because more and more people are moving. I mean, I was just listening to something where it's like, right now it's something like, there's only like 40% of the population is rural now, and they're predicting by like 2050 that only 20% of the population will be rural. But and so clearly, like, we need the cities, like they support the rural life right now in the way that our world is set up. I would love to see a return. I would love to see that not be true. I would love to see a return to small town life in a way. I'd like a revival of small farms and small communities that were self-supporting and self-sustaining and agriculturally based. But I don't know. Those aren't the predictions from the people that know a lot more than I do. Um,
Yeah, no. I think that it could definitely. I mean, the potential's there. The problem with agricultural based communities like we have now is they're part of the big agricultural machine, and
right.
I kind of like to push that return to permaculture and kind of
Yeah.
buying local, and encouraging people to utilize the environment to provide for themselves and for the community without destroying it.
Where did that where did those values come from for you?
I don't know. I think they just kind of grew the long as I grew older. I kind of noticed them more and more. Um, I got a lot of time to think, and I just decided basically that I think that was the best method or best way. Or that's the way people should go about trying to do things. Just because it's hard for everyday people, to do things to make a difference, in reality. Um, but they can do some smaller stuff like that, like buying local and making conscious small decisions to help improve everything.
No, really well said. I, I know I asked you about this. What is? Do you see your values reflected around you in Texas, in 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 a lot of other people who are there, or I mean, like, what's the culture like that you're surrounded by?
Um, I didn't grow up here per se. My dad grew up right around this area, um, and so my great grandfather's generation would have been much more along those lines before the oil
Right.
companies came in here and really took hold of everything. And I think what you see here now is what you see in a lot of small towns across the country, which is just, you know, sad to say, unfortunately, a bunch of big name brand stuff sucking money out of the town, and then eventually the town will die, as many have, and then people move to the cities.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless more, people start making prickly pear wine. Um,
Exactly.
so let's talk about your process. So you've already talked about sort of the gathering, but let's talk about the time you spend doing that and what that actually looks like. What do I mean, obviously, I share a fondness for prickly pear wine with you. This is a new thing that we're doing with Centralas as well, and I think I mean, for a lot of the same reasons that you've just mentioned. So I mean, I didn't know honestly what your answers to these questions would be, and I think it's really amazing that we both share similar ethos about that. And I really appreciate why you're doing what you're doing as much as what you're doing. But I've picked a few prickly pears this year in a few different landscapes, and it's one of the tougher picking things that you can pick. So tell me about what that's like for you.
Yeah, it's definitely labor intensive. Basically, what I would do is about the end of July is when we start to get the early out here. At least the end of July, the early fruits start to get ripe, and then they'll continue to ripen all the way until now. There's still cactus that are ripening up, and I'll basically go out in the morning time when it's cool. That's the lowest chance of seeing a snake is out there in the early morning, and then I
Got
go
it.
out and I have a little basically almost a blueberry picker, but it's a handheld little bucket kind of thing, and then a pair of
Uh-huh.
tongs, and then I just walk from cactus to cactus, pick them, fill my little bucket, and then I walk back to the driveway or road, whatever you want to call it, and fill the bigger bucket with them, and then I walk back out, and then I
Got it.
repeat that for several months.
How long each day do you go out for? I mean, are you out there for hours? Are you out there for like an hour?
Uh, I'd say 3 hours on average in the morning. I come in when it starts to get midday. It gets a little too hot out there
And what's
in
early?
August, July.
What's an early start for you? Like, when are you out there?
Uh, I try to get out there right after the sun comes up. So
Okay.
in the
Well,
early summer, that's about 7:30.
okay. All right. So it sounds like that's, I mean, which is also some of the picking that I've done on the coastal hillsides here in Malibu and areas like that. It's, I mean, just being out there is part of the reason to be picking. I mean, the picking is almost an excuse to be out there. Is that a little bit of what's going on there? I mean, it sounds like that's your daily walk and exercise,
Yeah.
as well as there you're create. You've got a task to accomplish, but it's like that task becomes almost an excuse for the experience of being out there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I get a mild workout in. I get to spend several hours outside, and I get the task done. So it's definitely
Yeah,
all three.
win win win. Yeah. Um, that's great. Okay, so what's the first? So you bring those in. So you're doing this over months, and that's kind of the nice thing about these. You're also, I think you mentioned to me earlier, you kind of, you're always in, not necessarily competition, but there's other people who are picking those prickly pears while you're out there picking them, or when you're not out there picking them. So
Yeah.
everybody's sharing these, right? So there's a good. I mean, they feed a lot of people, basically, a lot of creatures,
They do.
including yourself and your wine
Yeah.
drinkers. That's great. And how, like, can you? What's the breakdown of like who's eating on those, and how much do you get of what's available?
um, Based on my harvest this year, it looks like the deer, the raccoons, the foxes, and the grasshoppers eat approximately 30% of the fruit that are out there. Um, and then I probably lose another 10 to 15% to these bugs. And I don't know exactly what they're called, but they spin like a little web and they lay their eggs in the fruit basically, and
Oh,
then
are those the cochineal? They have the white powder over the edge, over the.
no, there are a few
Oh,
of those out here, but they're not
okay.
as prolific as this other insect, and I don't remember the
Oh,
name, but they are everywhere, and they take up probably 10 or 15% of the fruit, and then
oh, wow.
10% I probably miss or I just don't see because there's so many cactus hidden out here, and then the other 40 or 50% I'm able to harvest.
Right. Okay, got it. So it's yeah, I gotcha. So, and do ants? I mean, we have ants out here. Do you see ants as a problem? Not
They
problem, but
don't.
as one of the other participants.
They actually don't. Surprisingly, they won't crawl up onto the cactus and eat the fruit. But as soon as the fruit hit the ground, they'll be all over
Oh, well, we must have some bold ants out here then. I'll tell you what.
it.
um, all right, so you bring in the pears. Can you describe what that's like? I mean, what are they like? Do you sample them when you're out there? Do you have like a knife that you kind of peel them off, or do you just kind of wait till you get in? Are you tasting to see like, oh, this is ripe or this one's not ripe? What are you doing in terms of how
Well,
do you know when to pick them?
well, when I first started, it was a lot of trial and error. I was cutting fruit open to test and to see how long after they were picked, um, like how fast they would ripen up off the fruit or off the cactus, and then basically, by because at this point I've harvested almost 30, 40,000 tunas, so I've gotten the exact color and like texture of the skin that I can just look at a fruit and be like,
Yeah,
that one's ripe.
yeah.
And then basically once I've got the whole load in from the day, I'll let them sit netted. I'll put a bug net over them and I'll let them sit throughout the day, and that helps any ones that were on the less ripe side that I may have picked ripen up, and then come in. It lets the heat of the day go by before I have to go back out and burn them and bag them. Um,
Okay, well, let's talk about that. You burn them and bag them. So, um, so you've got a big pile of thorny fruit. Now, do you put them onto like a sorting table, or what's your what where do they go next from this big pile?
I do. I basically built a homemade table that is covered in metal grate that I can roll the fruit around on, and then I actually have a huge spoon that I made from a wine barrel stave that I used that I used to roll the fruit around, and
Uh huh.
I pour them onto this table. I take a big propane burner and I burn them one way, and then I use my spoon and I move them around. I burn them again. Um, and then the whole table hinges and I dump them into a tank of water where they get rinsed.
Now, for people who don't know why you're doing these things, um, so if I'm right, and I've seen this technique, I just thought it was labor intensive. So I'm guessing this torch that you're using is something like people might get in a city as a herbicide free weed killer. Like they
Yeah,
sell these things. It's like a super high hot torch, but it's got kind of a wide mouth, and you can just
they're
singe things. Basically, it's like
yeah.
okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's right. They're marketed traditionally as a weed burner, but they're
Right.
great
Okay.
for burn. They call them pear burners out here.
Hair. That's great. So how many people are doing this then? There's like they call it a pear burner. It sounds like there's a little local culture of doing this.
There's definitely local culture with the prickly pear, but
Okay.
because it's so labor intensive, people don't do very much stuff to scale.
Right.
And they do a lot of homemade jellies out of it. They do candy, all kinds of other stuff.
Right. Well, I definitely want to come back to the labor intensive and how that works out economically. But let's finish this process. Okay, so you're on like a wire mesh table so that any thorns can sort of fall through Is there anything underneath to collect those, or do you just sort of not walk under the table ever kind of vibe?
Yeah, no, they just fall onto the ground. They blow away in the wind. They're light enough.
I believe me, I've done some things where they've blown onto me. And have you had that where you've just like the wind shifts and you're like, and now I'm covered with thorns.
Yes, yes. It took me a couple weeks to figure out that I need to pick and dump them upwind.
Right. Yep. That's awesome. Because, and this is what I think I was getting at with, for those who aren't familiar with the pears, not only are there, visible thorns that, in some cases, and it depends on the variety. Sometimes those thorns are bigger or smaller and, more gnarly, more intense, or less so. But all of them have what's called a glochid, and they're like the little dots that you see on the pear. And those little dots have hair-like thorns, basically, that you can't even really see with the naked eye unless you have really good near vision. But as soon as you touch it, you'll start to feel that, because there's sort of like barbed micro hairs that just work their way into your skin. And that's what you're essentially, in addition to the big thorns, you're burning off those things. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Um, and the skin is pretty tough, so you're not really. Well, maybe you are. I mean, do you think you're changing the flavor of the fruit at all?
Um, I don't think so. I think that what it does a good job of is killing any of the wild yeast that may be on there. It helps
Okay.
eliminate those early because they harbor so much wild yeast naturally.
And so, I mean, my thinking about that, because I kind of come from a natural winemaking, approach to winemaking, was I wanted to preserve that. So I didn't. I've been trying to figure out a way to not have to torch or rinse these pears. So I've just mashed them whole. Of course, I'm using a variety that doesn't have huge thorns on it. But you are of the mind, like, this gives you a chance to sort of sterilize them and then have a controlled fermentation with an inoculated yeast. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay,
As
got
doing
it.
my best to get consistency, which is the only
Right.
thing that makes me nervous with the wild yeast.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of things besides just Saccharomyces that live in the wild. That and the chemistry of these fruit is very, I would say, it's volatile in terms of winemaking, because you have very little acid. It's just like the pH is, our pH when I measure it was like 5.35 or something like that. Like, and anybody that's in winemaking knows that you're harvesting grapes, between 3 and 4 pH. So 5 is like way, way high, very low acid. Uh, and because of that, you're kind of unprotected from a lot of things. Like that acid in grapes gives you a lot of helpful protection and preservation. So what are you doing then after the bath? Well, like, what's your process, and how do you vinifying these guys?
They'll I'll burn them. They'll get bagged. Then they go into deep freezers for storage. And then because of the scale of the operation we're doing here, I pull out as many as I need per batch. I'll let them thaw out. And what the
And at that
freezing does, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. You're about to say what I was going to ask.
Yeah, and what the freezing does is not only help us for storage because I don't have the size of the tanks needed to do all of this at one time, it also ruptures the cell walls inside the fruit, which allows us, once they thaw, to put them into a pot, boil them, and then the process of osmosis kind of helps us out with extracting the juice and the flavor from the fruit. And what we're left with is basically a pale, shriveled up, it looks almost like a grape, but a prickly pear grape.
You mean when you get them out of the freezer, they're pale and shriveled up?
No, no, they come out of the freezer and they're still good
Right.
looking.
When are they shriveled up?
I'll put them into the pot once they've thawed.
Oh, okay. So now you're cooking them too
Yeah,
after putting them out of
basically.
the freezer. Okay, you're boiling them, or you're yeah. So and what is that doing?
That helps kill off anything that the burn or the freeze didn't kill. So now we should be almost entirely sterile. It pulls the fruit or the juice and the flavor out of the fruit, um, and then we
And do you,
basically strain it out of there, and we're ready to ferment.
okay, so you're straining at that point. through, I'm guessing, cheesecloth into like in a big colander type thing, or what are you doing? How are you doing that?
Yeah. No, that's
Okay.
exactly right.
All right. And uh, so you none of the skin is going into the fermentation.
That's correct.
Okay. Got it. All right. This is fascinating. Now, where did you learn to do all that? Is that something that is in your local, you know, culture as well? You've seen other people do this?
No, this was a lot of experimenting. um, yeah,
Yeah,
no,
that's definitely a unique
just
process.
yeah, and it just kind of the process fell into place with experimenting, and then also working it into scaling up an operation based on wild fruit. That's so unique.
Yeah. Yeah. What so okay, so the reality that I would see that somebody, who is a maybe more of a capitalist than I am and would comment more critically is that this would be very hard to scale. I mean, especially with your being the forager harvester solely, as well as this sort of uh, I mean, I can envision bigger equipment doing this, and having like tables of, blowtorches lined up that they go through on a conveyor belt. I mean, I can envision it, but it does seem like it's a big process, right? Like there's a lot to do. It's labor intensive. I mean,
Yeah,
just picking them is a delicate thing. Like as we've already mentioned, it's not something you can rush or without getting harmed. Um, basically, and then you might be able to shortcut some of the process. And I know that there are places where these are done at an industrial level, but you don't. It doesn't sound like you have an intention to go there. Is that true?
no, that's accurate. I am trying to keep it small, and to try to scale up. Unless it was a massive operation, I wouldn't get the benefits of economy of scale from a mid-sized operation, and it would be too hard to fabricate all the equipment and hire all the people that you would need to forage all of this to make it something that would be realistic. So
Yeah.
my goal is to keep it small, basically just enough to make a living and enjoy what I do.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, what scale do you think that is? I mean, so I'm just going to throw it out there that based on the amount of work that goes into this and the life-threatening rattlesnake, prickly pear thorn gathering harvest that's involved, I would bet you're selling this for like 150 a bottle. Is that anywhere? Is that maybe
No,
250?
no. I am trying to keep it between in the national average, and I'm looking to sell it between $20 and $25 a bottle.
Wow. I mean, I just want
So
people to understand how precious this stuff is, and what a deal it is, what a value it is to be able to buy that at that level. That's fantastic. So we didn't finish the winemaking process. If so you've got it, you've strained it, you've got the juice, you've got it in a your tank, your biggest tank, and if I'm correct, you're adding sugar and yeast. Is that correct?
that's correct. I'm adding sugar and yeast.
And do you know what your bricks are at that point before you add sugar? Like what your sugar content is?
I couldn't say off the top of my head. I know that I'm shooting for something that's going to put me at 12 to 13% roughly.
Alcohol. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, finished product.
Okay. Got it. Do you have a favorite yeast that you use? Or are you still experimenting?
Uh, I'm still experimenting. I think I've narrowed it down to what I want to use, which is either the MA33.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
It sounds
It's
familiar, but
just
I'm
it's primarily for fruit wines.
okay. Okay.
And then the Red Star Classic, I believe that's what it's called.
Okay.
I think they changed the name recently, but
Now, are you doing a lot of note taking, of your chemistry and that kind of stuff? Or are you somebody who kind of follows the same process but doesn't care too much about those kind of details? Like, are you
I
testing for anything? Are you sending this off to labs or anything? Or do you have your own
no
lab?
no a makeshift lab maybe, but
Right.
no formal testing. as far as the like chemistry process goes. I
Uh-huh.
did a lot of the smaller scale experimenting kind of already as far as how I wanted to, what I wanted to use, what worked well, what didn't. And I'm hoping we're actually doing our first full scale test batch this coming month. So hopefully everything goes smooth from start to finish, and the finished product's what we're looking for.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds exciting. And so I looked at your website. Let's talk about those finished products. Not only I mean, your commitment to wild Texas wines is, I mean, if it hasn't come through already, is clearly like a full commitment. And I love that you're also using mesquite as a sort of a wood flavoring agent. Can you talk about how you use it? Because you're obviously you're in a big vat. How are you aging these wines?
Yeah, I'm initially we're initially in a 41 gallon vat, and then once we do our first rack, then I basically I moved to carboys just because the scale we're at here is so small that I can get away with using glass carboys, and it helps me keep the consistency where I want it. And I can't get mesquite barrels anywhere because they don't exist. Um,
Yet.
so I basically, yeah, yeah. I use slivers of mesquite slab, which is just a big milled mesquite tree that's been air dried or kiln dried for however many years. Um, so I get the real good heartwood out of the mesquite, and then that's
Yeah,
what we
nice.
use in basically measured and weighed slats that will sit in the carboy with the wine for prescribed amount of time.
And are you charring them at all? Toasting them with fire? Or
I
are they?
had done some
Yep.
experimenting with the charred, and I ended up preferring the uncharred. So they're actually just the air dried mesquite.
What does that impart to the wine?
I would say a smoothness that you can't get without that.
Okay.
Um, there's definitely a sweet spot where too much and you get way too much of a weird flavor with the wood, and too
Okay.
little and you don't get quite the smoothness that you want.
So are we talking it's in there for weeks or months or years?
No, no.
Okay.
And that's the beauty of using slivers over a barrel is the square inch, the exposure of wood to gallons of wine is much larger than you would get in a traditional wine barrel, which allows us to do the aging in a lot shorter process, at least with the wood.
Got
That
it.
won't speed up our clarification process at all, but um, the wood aging specifically is much shorter, just a couple weeks.
Got it. Okay, got it. Now, I noticed that both of them have a little sweetness to them. One's off dry and one's semi-sweet. So that I mean, how are you processing it? So are you then adding sweetness to the wine at the end and filtering? Like how are you keeping? I don't know. I know it's more difficult to make a sweet wine than a dry wine because you've got microbes that want to eat that sugar once you anytime there's sugar in the wine. So what are you doing to make that happen?
Um, the yeast that I'm using, I'm trying to get the attenuation so a bit lower than traditionally, which allows us to have a little bit of residual sugar, but the yeast dies off from the ABV or dies off, runs its course basically.
Yeah, okay.
I
So
don't
it's
do
it's
any back sweetening.
nice. So will I mean, I guess if you're using the same yeast under the same conditions, you should be able to replicate that. But have you had any issues with consistency as far as that goes?
No, it hasn't been, and keep in mind we haven't done enough rounds at full scale for me to say accurately if we're going to have consistency issues. But
Well, you can always just
um,
make various levels of sweetness wine, like something for
yeah,
everybody, depending on what happens with
and
the batch.
yeah, and if we have consistency issues, that's something that is easy to fix, and that's the beauty of being smaller at scale. Is I don't if I have a batch that came out weird or something, I don't lose thousands of bottles.
Right. Yeah. And so, have you had any failures?
Early on, knock on wood, hopefully our full scale test batch next month, we won't have any issues.
Nice. What went wrong at first,
um,
or with the
it
batch that
was,
went wrong?
I don't know that I'd say it went wrong. It just, the finished product based on what the variable that we adjusted wasn't quite what we were looking for. Whether it was it was when we aged it with oak wine barrel wood versus the mesquite, or different concentrations of the fruit juice, or the type of sugar we used.
Right. What is your least favorite part of winemaking?
The paperwork.
Oh.
And that doesn't even fall in really to the category. That's more business. Um,
Oh no, I think
the
yeah, you
actual,
could. Yeah, well, okay, let's limit to the actual the labor.
um, the waiting. I
Me
think the
too.
waiting's the worst part.
You and I are like brothers from another mother. It's funny. Where I would have said paperwork and first, and then probably waiting. My patience is. I'm the worst personality for a winemaker. And then my probably third is the cleaning. Uh,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
especially if you're using carboys. Oh my god, the carboys that I have to clean. The number of carboy cleanings that I have to go through in a year. Um, I'm sure it's worse for you, so I shouldn't complain. I probably have it easy. Um, well, so uh, all right. I think I've asked you a little bit about everything I wanted to ask you. Is there, where do you see this going? I mean, I think you talked a little bit about this, but um, you're going to expand to some other wild fruit there. You are going to hopefully be able to make a living doing this, and um, you know, anything else?
Um, I mean, long term, it would be nice to do a similar idea in different places all around the country with local fruit. Um, that was that we were able to harvest without putting a dent in the natural ecosystem.
Yeah.
So if that's something we're able to, I would like to do that in some other states, just to help bring people closer to where they live.
So you mean like the idea of having a local beverage that is literally, like grown there, made there from indigenous fruits that are from there, that do well there, that don't have to be, you know, cultivated with a bunch of chemicals, or that they are abundant in a natural habitat. Is that the idea?
Absolutely, that's
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
I love that. I share that vision. um, that's fantastic. Why prickly pears? I mean, why? Like, it's just because they were there, and there were a lot of them. I mean, if your grandfather had a ranch in upstate New York, you might be into apples. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right.
I love it. Or actual
Yeah,
or pears as opposed to prickly pears, non prickly pears.
yeah.
Smooth pears. I love that. That's great. Well, how can we stay in touch and find out more? How can anybody learn more and follow along with your journey, and hopefully soon taste some of this unique stuff?
Yeah, yeah. You can jump on the website, wildtexaswines.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Wild Texas Wines. Um, and I'll kind of
Both
keep
of both
keep
of those
those
are plural,
updated with.
right? Both plural. Wild
Yes.
Texas
Yeah.
wines, not wine. Okay, got
Yes.
it. Wines, got it.
Yes, sir.
And then, sorry, I cut you off. I apologize.
No, yeah, and then I'll kind of keep everyone posted on the process, start to finish, on the Instagram, and keep updating the website as things progress.
Well, that's awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation. It's near and dear to my heart, and I couldn't imagine having a better conversation with somebody who's doing it about this than with you. It's really been a treat. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's been awesome.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your time and attention. And if you'd like to try some prickly pear wine, we are going to have a very limited supply at Centralas, so please sign up for our email list or join our wine club. You can do that at centralaswine.com, CENTRALAS wine.com. It's the best way to get access to our what's going to be very limited supply of some very interesting wine. That's centralaswine.com.